Hey guys, it's Trafotin. Have you heard about that really bad Linux vulnerability? It's hitting the news everywhere, and it's with the compression software library liblzma, or better known by its shorthand name XZ, and its code was recently injected with a backdoor. Now, when most people hear about a backdoor, your brain internally filters out the term because most of the time it's just bozos on the internet abusing the term or not understanding what it means. But this time, unfortunately, it is not a drill. And also, remember how I said it was a Linux vulnerability? It's not. It's actually much worse than that. If you use another operating system like Windows, macOS, heck, even BSD, you are affected by this. And I'm going to do a quick recap on the situation, but I'm not interested in telling you the news. The news doesn't really mean anything if we don't learn anything from this. Instead, let's discuss the impact that this situation has on you, the end user, and some solutions the open source community can do to rectify the situation and respond effectively. Everybody compresses their files. It could be a zip file, or it could be done by your operating system, or a website you visit so you don't use as much bandwidth. Heck, even if you're watching this video right now on YouTube, PeerTube, or Odyssey, compression happens on these videos so you can view them without wasting too much bandwidth. To compress things, programmers rely on compression algorithms, which bulk analyze files and try to replace pieces of the file with smaller bits of information. That way, when a file is uncompressed, you get the same information while the file stored takes up less space, or the file delivered to you uses less bandwidth. If you extract a file, that space becomes filled up again, and you have the exact same file that you were left with before it was compressed. In the case of XC, a developer at Microsoft, Anders Freund, discovered that liblzma, the core compression library in many popular programs, not just Linux programs, was manipulated by the XC maintainer Jia Tan to steal security keys to log into servers. The vulnerability was only found after SSH, a protocol commonly used to log into remote computers, was taking mere milliseconds longer to connect, and Freund happened to notice this and started testing. This attack is not normal for open source projects and speaks of a sophisticated actor with in-depth knowledge of the inner workings of the XC project and was scouting for potential weaknesses or vulnerabilities inside of it to use against other people. And there's more to this story, but I'm really returning to the story to pull details where they're relevant rather than trying to cover the actual story itself. And if you're a normal end user, or if you happen to just have a home lab, you're probably safe from the XC disaster altogether. And if you have a server, most servers run older libraries rather than running the ultra newest bleeding edge libraries, including the ultra bleeding edge libraries that had a backdoor in them. And even if your system had the most updated backdoored XC, you would still need to have a distro that was basically connected to the public internet or downloaded the releases page from GitHub and unpacked them. And that's a lot of big ifs because most reputable projects don't do these things. So if you're a normal user, keep calm and download the latest update from your package manager. But even after you download the updates, we have arguably a more complicated and still bigger problem remaining. What do we do if something like this happens again? What's worse is what other vulnerabilities out there are using the same tactics as the XC backdoor in other open source projects. What are developers doing about them to detect it? The unfortunate reality is this will not be the last time this happens. You bet, after the attention that this scandal has gotten over the last couple days, that attackers across the world and the security industry will be watching this. There will be no clean solutions, but I want to at least see what's being done right now and what we can try to learn from it. Let's talk about some technological solutions about reforming developer practices. I'd say one of the big things here is that we need to look for protocols that can be put into place that block things like the XE backdoor from happening. When the XE backdoor was first discovered, extensive testing with the infected library showed that the Gia-Tan account would often sneak in fake whitespace Unicode characters lookalikes, which are basically characters that you can also type out but look identical to a space to falsify commit history, and would also add various files to the testing process to deliver the final blow and make it more easy to conceal this from anyone looking in. To detect white space or changes like this, it's going to require extra code from developers into testing tools, into deployment tools, and we'll see this with a lot of projects going forward. But something a lot of other Linux distributions do to prevent something like this from happening is what's called reproducible builds. The backdoor in XE relied on someone downloading archives from the releases page, which are binary files, not the source code. So when developers like Anders Freunds come around to troubleshoot, contributors like him can verify the source code matches the final product of the libraries or binaries. And in fact, where Freund discovered this vulnerability was in Debian's testing branch. For years, distributions like Debian and NixOS have been champions of reproducible builds because it creates a great amount of trust between all parts of software delivery, because it allows maintainers to verify if the code they make or if the code they download matches the source code that they download and build. And if you're willing to pitch in, lots of Linux vendors are always looking for help to make sure that their software is reproducible. But we should also talk about cultural reform. And open source, in particular, has a very big problem, and it's a human one. And this is not going to be very easy to fix. The lead maintainer of XE, Lassie Collins, has been doing so tirelessly for years. But unfortunately, despite the fact there's been a trickle in of other contributors, for the most part, it was only him working on XE for the longest time. And the fact is, no other contributor did as much work as Colin, who was very open about his mental health issues online. Except if you see what actually prompted this response, and you'll find out that the response was actually prompted by 2 puppet accounts who are probably run by the perpetrator behind the Gia-Tan account, because 3 days later, the Gia-Tan account joins as a contributor and as a main developer of the XE project. So there's multiple layers to this, so let's break this down. I think the most important thing that we can learn from here is some basic operational security, especially of how we conduct ourselves on the internet. It's tough enough to be a big target on the internet, but I would argue that if you're a developer for a library that's commonly used with thousands, hundreds of thousands of machines out in the world, being a developer of software such as that falls into that camp. Now, I know I'm gonna get a lot of flack for this, but I would like to remind everybody, and please tell everybody as a strong suggestion, please do not tell the internet about any of your mental health issues, especially with the risk that somebody is going to use it to exploit your overworked state of mind or something even worse. Oh, what's that called? It's called social engineering.
Desperate enough for the business to break protocol and let me in. Lonely enough to break.
I don't want to downplay developer mental health because I understand it's tough, but unfortunately, because of situations like this, I strongly recommend keeping your mental health conditions private from other developers on the internet, because if you're not careful, you could end up in a situation just like Colin did. But on mental health, we also need to talk about open source development and this almost consumerist culture that's been injected into FOSS. And you'll see this all the time by maintainers being accosted by people visiting their repos who ask for new features or fix a bug or two. The problem is some of these people are just not very nice about it, to put it mildly. And it's not just XZ that has to deal with it, because tons of other projects have to deal with the same issues. For example, the Android App Store F-Droid has had to deal with the same kind of burdens. They've had to deal with backdoors attempted to being injected into their software but also people berating the maintainers over incredibly minor issues and getting very aggressive about it. In fact, the whole XZ backdoor probably started because of these puppet accounts using very aggressive language to make Colin feel like he wasn't doing enough. And the issue here is a communication one, and there's no easy fix. So, that being said, let me provide a few of my internet armchair opinions. Projects need to be moderated and curb toxic behavior like this. Notice that nobody stepped in to quash this kind of behavior against Colin. Open source projects on the internet aren't the only things on the internet with these kinds of issues, but I think it's high time that projects need to start being highly moderated and start addressing issues like this. I'm not going to say how, because I'm going to let you be the judge of how, because I don't have a good answer for this. And this comes and goes without saying that with social engineering and hacking, it's not about the code you write or the protocols in place. The biggest weakness is always people. And if you don't care for your people, those people are going to get burnt out and leave. The other thing too is, no matter how big or small your project is, you should have a clear vision in mind of your project from the get-go. For XE, the complaints left by the sock puppet accounts could have easily been quashed by simply declaring the project as feature complete. I would imagine that most people don't think about things like a compression library, and it would only really be necessary to keep it moving forward or keep it up to standard with most modern Linux vendors. There also needs to be a defined pipeline for users to give back to a project, either financially or through maintenance, like fixing bugs or packaging the software elsewhere. So that way, someone like Colin isn't left as the only maintainer because no one is touching his software or helping him in the process. Getting to that point requires that a project has vision, and it's vision and leadership that bring successful communities together to tackle complex problems in open source. And these problems can be technological, social, or cultural, but it still needs vision that inspires people to say, I want to be a part of that. And building healthy relationships like this makes the project better for everyone. And I think it's really important that if we analyze the social solution, the technological solution, and the cultural solutions, the matter here is not just picking the right one, but it's also that we need all three of them. And the whole situation isn't so much about security as it is a wake-up call for proper community development and solid policy against things that would have prevented the XE backdoor from happening. And you can read all the news you want about the XE backdoor, but if the open source community doesn't review its own practices, we will be doomed to repeat the same mistakes again. So let's go out there and make sure it doesn't happen. So why don't you go leave a like on this video, or comment down below any solution that you might have for the XE backdoor altogether. And I know there's gonna be a lot of opinions. So thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Have a great rest of your week.